Welcome, everybody, to ICUJP's Friday Forum. We have an extraordinary program for you today, and we welcome back Greg Palast, who has been with us in previous programs and has been an ally in our work for so many years. I believe, Carol Francis, do you have Greg's bio?
Greg Palast is known for his investigative reports for The Guardian, BBC Television, and Democracy Now! Palast is the author of several New York Times bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Palast's new film, Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman, produced by Martin Sheen and narrated by Rosario, will be released later this year. Go to Greg Palast, that's P-A-L-A-S-T, gregpalast.com for Palast's investigative reports and to support the release of his film, Vigilante.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Steve. And thanks to Rick. I know he's gone to take care of parents, so that's important. Thank you for having me here this morning. Mainly I want to talk as a small group, so there's no sense giving a big long lecture. But I've just, for those of you who know me, I'm probably best known for what is politely called vote suppression. I beat vote suppression. In fact, I kind of invented this field in journalism back in 2000 when I was working for The Guardian and BBC living in London. I'm watching black people come in front of the cameras in Florida during the Gore-Bush election. And all these black people kept saying, I was not able to vote. And this is on BBC. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. In my kind of conspiracy nut mind, I'm called a conspiracy nut. It always gets a laugh from the conspirators. But I had this notion that there was a computer program that was knocking off black people off the voter rolls before the election. And sure enough, within a couple of weeks, I was able to get a disc out of the office of Catherine Harris, who was the Republican Secretary of State under Jeb Bush, the governor, who's only, I guess, coincidentally, one might say, the brother of the candidate for president, George W. George W. Bush became president of the United States by just 537 votes. But that's not counting the 58,000 black men who were removed from the voter rolls of Florida due to claims that they were felons who had no right to vote in Florida at the time. And that's how George W. Bush became president, by removing black people from the voter rolls. 58,000 black men, he won by 537 votes. Now, if I say that the election was stolen, you will not be able to post this discussion on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram because we will be attacked as election deniers. So we have one of the things I'd like to get to today is that there is this new censorship, which unfortunately the right is doing a very good job of censoring news about elections. But unfortunately, this push for censorship has come from the left. And we'll have some discussion about that, because I'm worried that once we get into a contest of censorship with the right, the truth is going to lose. So let's first, but for 9 years, I've been going to Georgia. And starting in 2014 for Al Jazeera, and then later for Salon and Rolling Stone, and then making my own films, the one I just made for Martin Sheen, narrated by Rosario Dawson, called Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman. And the suppressor number one is Brian Kemp. Now, we have a little trailer from the film. Can we show that right now? Is that possible?
So you didn't call him, but you challenged his right to vote or have his ballot challenged.
Sir, get out of my house.
Okay, I will get out of your
my
house. I just
now.
Voter fraud.
Law enforcement is going to their houses and places of employment and making people afraid to go out and exercise their rights.
Open and clear, we have a visual. Repeat, we have a visual.
And today to come out and not be able to vote, it bothers me to my core.
My life was on the line, I could go to prison. If I just commit suicide, this will be over.
Stop voter fraud.
They raided a voter registration office and tried to send all of these college kids to jail.
Call our voter fraud hotline.
Tonight, Governor Kemp has signed that controversial election bill. He signed Senate Bill 202.
That doesn't mean that you get to levy a charge against thousands of people that you don't even know and get them, removed off the rolls.
Is this an attempt to
nothing
remove
to
a
do
lot
with it.
of
That has
Democrats,
nothing to do
black
with it.
people
No, it
from
isn't.
voting?
Get out of my house now.
Where are we from? Georgia!
Are you removing black voters from the voter rolls just so you can win this election?
Right. So what we have now is and I'm getting very discouraged actually after 22 years of this. Like I said, I did that first investigation back in 2000 of vote suppression. I've done many other investigations. If you read my book, Vulture's Picnic, especially, on everything from Chevron's destroying the rainforest in Ecuador to vulture financiers in Africa, you name it. But I keep coming back to voting because if you don't have the vote, you don't have nothing. Okay. So what we have in Georgia, what you just saw, we just had an election in which Raphael Warnock won re-election, very, very close. He had to go to a runoff. Won the first round by only 35,000 votes out of 3.5 million. How did that happen when he's running against a candidate who is nearly a joke, Herschel Walker? And the answer is something which has absolutely not been reported. And it's very difficult for me to report because it goes against the ridiculous claims made on everything from Fox News to MSDNC, which is that there was a record turnout of voters in Georgia. And that is complete, absolute, total horseshit. There was a record turnout. That is a record plummet in the turnout. Now, why is that important? Because the Wall Street Journal said, after it was well known that Georgia had passed a law, SB 202, signed by Governor Brian Kemp, which was one of the worst Jim Crow laws I've seen in my career. It's the most restrictive voting law since the Voting Rights Act was passed, and of course has been gutted. And so what the papers were claiming is that despite all the vote suppression, black people overcame it and there was no problem. So where was, the new law, SB 202, was called Jim Crow 2.0 by the NAACP, by Gerald Griggs, who is the president of the NAACP, who, by the way, is in the film Vulture's Picnic, in the film Vigilante. The problem is that in the runoff election, when Warnock won last time against Kelly Loeffler, there were 4.5 million votes. 4.5 million votes. This time, there were 3.5 million votes. Now, I don't care what arithmetic you use, but that was not a record turnout. That was a record plummet in turnout. How did you lose 1 million votes? Not a single news outlet in America, not a single news outlet, and I want to repeat that, had noted the massive drop in turnout in Georgia. Instead, you got this complete horseshit. Now, where did the horseshit come from? The horseshit came from the Republican hack Secretary of State of Georgia. It came from Brian Kemp himself. And somehow, from the New York Times, in fact, the New York Times actually said that the Jim Crow law, I kid you not, they wrote an article that it increased turnout. Now, here's the thing. These are not secret numbers. I didn't have to do a big investigation. In fact, let me just show you. I can show you this. Hang on. If you see the big line, that's the number of votes, and that's from the Secretary of State's office. The big line, the big thick line, is the 4.5 million votes from 2 years ago, and the little one, that's the vote this time, 3.5 million votes. A massive plummet in voting. How did that happen? And why did that happen? Almost the entire decline in voting was the mail-in and early voting. Now, who used mail-in and early voting? African Americans and students, people in Atlanta. And what happened is because Raphael Warnock won the mail-in vote 2 years ago by 2 to 1, more than 2 to 1. Well, that's how Raphael Warnock won, because Raphael Warnock, just so you know, lost the in-person balloting by about almost 500,000 votes. He overcame that with his crushing victory in the mail-in votes, so the in-person votes. So they made mail-in balloting nearly illegal in Georgia. They cut the number of early voting days. You know, blacks use the Souls to the Polls Day on Sunday. Why? Because when they go on the Tuesday of elections in African-American areas, you'll see these massive lines many hours long. You won't see them in white areas. So what they did was they made in-person early voting or mail-in voting nearly illegal. They cut the time for early voting from 2 years ago, when it was 17 days of early voting. They cut it to 7. They would have cut it to 6, except the court said you had to make it 7, because the reason they cut it to 6 was to celebrate, and I kid you not, Confederate Army Day. If someone has their sound on, that's making a hissing sound. So if you're not on, if you can mute yourself, yeah. And so we ended up with now dig this. Most people cannot mail in their ballots. Why? In a runoff, they crushed the time from 60 days to 28 days. By the way, 28 days, why didn't they cut it from 60 to 30 days? The answer is because if they made it 30 days, people could register to vote. People could register to vote for the runoff. You need 30 days. So they made it 28 days from the election to the runoff, so no new people could register. One of the reasons Warnock won last time is a massive registration drive before the runoff of young people who were just turning 18 and people who are moving into the state. This time there was no ability to register to vote. In addition, because it was such a short time, the counties couldn't even print the ballots. They couldn't even print the ballots and get them to people on time and get them back on time. So again, these Jim Crow operations, obviously we know about the infamous stuff of you can't serve someone a pizza if they're standing in line for 5 hours. You can't give them a glass of water. That's a felony crime. Understand, if you go to gregpalast.com, you'll see some films where I'm walking along the lines in Atlanta. Every single early voting station in Atlanta, every single one, had more than a 2-hour wait, and it was raining. You hand someone an umbrella, that's a felony crime. And you got women there with their kids because school was out. And you'll see 2.5-hour lines in every single polling station in Atlanta. Outside of Savannah, the lines were 10 minutes to 15 minutes at most. And in some rural areas, 0 lines, the white rural areas. So they made it so that it was very difficult for African Americans and young peoples and others to vote. So they lost 1 million voters. This Jim Crow law really had an effect and was completely unreported. And worse, because now Brian Kemp is played as some type of freaking hero because he supposedly stood up to Donald Trump. Let me tell you right now, this guy didn't stand up to Donald Trump. There's no evidence of that at all. He called Donald Trump called the governor and said, overturn the vote. What he meant, find me 12,000 votes. What he meant was, specifically, he said, decertify the votes in the Atlanta counties. Just don't accept those ballots. And Kemp said, I have no legal authority to do that. Well, that wasn't standing up to Trump. That's just telling him he has no legal authority, which he did not. What I'm concerned about, because no one knows what Brian Kemp said to the grand jury, but how come the president of the United States then called the Secretary of State of Georgia? I suspect, and I used to work for the Justice Department, I'm usually not wrong on these things, that it was the governor himself said, I don't have the authority, but the guy down the hall in my state building, the Secretary of State, does. If so, then Brian Kemp is a co-conspirator in the attempt to overturn this election. He's not a hero who stood up to Trump at all. He's even said, I haven't stood up to Trump. But why am I bringing up Brian Kemp? Because the Wall Street Journal has already endorsed him for president.
Damn.
And the New York Times has run such glowing profiles of him that their nose is so far up Brian Kemp's rectum that the papers turn brown. This is a big problem. This phony idea that somehow Brian Kemp is a man for all seasons. He's an ultra right wing. He's to the right of Donald Trump on almost every issue. Let me repeat that, to the right of Trump on almost every issue. There's this idea that he's somehow moderate. This is the guy who ran his campaign saying, you'll go to his campaign ads. If you see the film Vigilante, you get to see it. You'll get to see it. But, he says, I got me a pickup truck so I can round up illegals myself. Yeah, I just said that. I'm a politically incorrect conservative. That's me. The problem is that he's gone on a right-wing crusade there. This idea that we've gone Trump crazy, that if someone appears even the least to stand up to Trump, he must be a good guy. This is the guy that refused Medicaid expansion for his state. And it's mostly poor white people who have no health insurance there. This is the guy who also, and this is very important, this is the guy who also signed a bill, supposedly in one of these new attacks on what is supposedly called critical race theory. The bill makes it illegal to teach so-called divisive historical concepts. That's in the law. So we have a new Scopes trial. Basically, I'd love to see a teacher say, I'm going to teach divisive historical concepts. I'm going to teach that we had slavery in Georgia. But he's made that discussion almost impossible. They've already have a list, and I kid you not, of books that are being banned in the schools and libraries because they teach you literally can't take out a book from a library which tells the truth about Georgia's history. So what is it that Brian Kemp doesn't want you to know? The answer is, if you talk about the history of Georgia, the name is Kemp because it's been changed. The original name was Habersham. And the Habersham family, the Porter family, these are the people that first brought slaves to Georgia. Now, very few Americans know our history of enslavement. Georgia, what we now call, what is the colony of Georgia. And by the way, the colony of Georgia was almost the entire Deep South. The colony of Georgia included what is today Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, pieces of Florida. And that Georgia colony made slavery illegal. It was settled first by Swiss and German settlers with some English. And then the King of England forced Georgia to accept enslaved people from Africa, and they were that deal was cut by Brian Kemp's family. Now, I'm not saying, look, Brian Kemp didn't bring people in chains from Africa, but why is he covering up the history? I spoke to his cousin, said, why doesn't he admit where our family got its money and power? And you'll see in Vigilante, I go to the plantations where his ancestors, including an infamous guy named Roswell, who was part of his family, was internationally famous as one of the cruelest slave drivers in the planet. There was actually a best-selling book about the cruelty at the Kemp family plantations. Maybe that's what he wants to cover up, because Georgia today is still a plantation. And you'll see in the film, I go to the Georgia Historical Society to just try to get some information about voting rights, the history of voting rights in Georgia. And the interview is suddenly stopped in a panic. And I find out why. Because the professor who is telling about the history of Georgia begins telling us about the real history of Georgia, enslavement, and that Georgia, again, was a free state until the Habersham, the Kemp family, brought slaves to Georgia to deal with King George. You know, by the way, many people don't know this, but Thomas Jefferson, despite might have been a hypocrite owning slaves, but he was an abolitionist. And he wrote in the Declaration of Independence, the longest part of the Declaration of Independence, which you've never seen, is a long screed against slavery. That the King of England, one of the complaints about the King of England is that he enforced slave labor upon the Americas. That one section of the Declaration of Independence, it's the only section of the Declaration of Independence which was removed by the Continental Congress at the demand of Kemp's ancestors, who were members of the Continental Congress. So a major statement of against slavery was actually in the Declaration of Independence. The reason, by the way, Jefferson said it was forced on us, because the Habershams brought in slaves, as the locals predicted, who begged the king not to allow slavery in the Americas, because they said that they knew that they would be reduced to slavery. So we need this history, but teaching it is illegal. And this is a big, big problem. And then because you cannot, if you suppress history, that goes with the suppression of the vote. And when you're suppressing, like, for example, I just got a threatening note from Google. I'm not making this up. If I could share the screen, I'd show it to you. I got a threatening note from Google and Microsoft saying that they are considering blocking my website because I said that in 2018, Stacey Abrams would have been governor if not for the illegal removal of hundreds of thousands of black voters from the voter rolls by Brian Kemp. And that made me an election denier. So to report that story, now you have to understand, when I reported that story for Salon, back in 2018, when Stacey Abrams was running for governor, Brian Kemp removed 500,000 voters from the voter rolls, saying they didn't live in Georgia, that they were, quote, long inactive voters. In fact, I hired the top people who are advisors to Amazon, top advisors to Google itself, who are address location experts. In other words, Google knows where you live. Amazon knows where you live. So I hired these people to go through the list of the 500,000 people that Brian Kemp, who was Secretary of State, he's running for governor, and he's in charge of the vote. How Brian Kemp, after he moved 500,000 voters, we took his list of 500,000 voters, and they ran 1,800 data points against each name and told us with absolute certainty, they gave us a list of 340,144 voters who were illegally removed from the voter rolls because they lived exactly where they were registered to vote. They lived in the houses where they were registered to vote, but Brian Kemp removed them. Overwhelmingly young people, voters of color, including, you'll see in my film, if you go to gregpalast.com, you can see clips. Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, I was there at the polling station when she was thrown out. She was thrown out. They said she didn't live in Atlanta anymore. And then I went down the street to the house that she's been living in for a long time. I know she's been there a long time because there on the wall is a picture of her having dinner with Martin Luther King, who's been dead for half a century. In fact, the year he was shot is the year that she was first allowed to register to vote. And in 2018, she was about to vote for Stacey Abrams. It would have been her 50th year of voting. She dressed to the nines. She had a walker, and they threw her out. Now, then Stacey Abrams cited the case of Martin Luther King's cousin. She cited my work and said, Stacey Abrams, for the first time in my career, I heard a major Democrat say this election was stolen. Yeah, she used more polite terms. She said, look, if the rules had been fair, if they hadn't removed these people, I would be governor. And because of that, she's been roundly and viciously attacked, not only by the right wing, but by some guy named Joe Biden. I don't know what the hell he does for a living, because he doesn't seem to know anything about vote suppression or care. And the Democratic Party has basically abandoned Stacey Abrams and attacked her for supposed, and they've allowed Brian Kemp, and they've allowed his Secretary of State, who's been on 60 Minutes, who's been on MSNBC saying, well, Donald Trump denied the election, even though the election in Georgia was fair, but so did Stacey Abrams. They make this equivalence. Well, Trump said the election was stolen. Stacey Abrams said the election was stolen. As Stacey Abrams said, the difference is that I'm telling the truth. I've got the facts. And the facts came from my research. However, now, because of that research, and by the way, Salon nominated my work for a Pulitzer Prize for that research. That research did win the International Pulitzer Prize called the Global Editors Award. But nevertheless, I'm being faced with having my site blocked, turned down, my Instagram and my Facebook ring-fenced, etc., because I've reported that Stacey Abrams would have won, except for this illegal purge of voters. There were, are you ready? 340,144 voters wrongly removed from the polls. And that's just Georgia. But the problem is this new censorship coming in where you can't talk about, you can use the wonderful term vote suppression. But if you ever notice that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and others will write about, or Washington Post will write stories about vote suppression laws and, oh, these ID laws and these can't serve pizza and these long lines and they cut the early voting stations, blah, blah, blah. There's all these vote suppression tactics. But have you ever seen once, ever in the past 2 decades that any of these papers has ever said the vote suppression overturned the vote? That if it weren't for vote suppression, if it weren't for blocking black people from voting, if it weren't for blocking black people, the election would have come out differently. No, our elections are perfect. Somehow we have all this vote suppression, but it never seems to have any effect. Because if you say it has an effect, then you're an election denier. You're undermining the faith in our electoral system. Well, guess what? I don't have any goddamn faith in our electoral system. That's the truth. It's an apartheid voting system. Now, we don't lose all the I don't want to discourage people from voting because that's ridiculous. They only shave about 4 to 6% of the vote at most. But that's enough in most elections. Like they couldn't stop Warnock. But you realize he won by less than 1% of the vote. And it's not whether I'm for or against Warnock. They just blocked 1 million voters in Georgia from voting. It's that simple. And the problem is this censorship demand has been kicked off by the Democrats and the left, not by the right. They're using it because they're smart. They'll use it as a weapon. This attack, by the way, the Microsoft and the Google attack on my site is being directed by a group called NewsGuard. They're there to hunt down purveyors of fake news, like I'm Alex Jones, right? NewsGuard is headed by Gordon Krovitz, the former publisher of the Wall Street Journal, an ultra right-wing so-called journalist. He's an ultra right-wing hitman. This is the guy who's determining what is fake news and what isn't. But none of this would have happened if the Democrats hadn't started screaming that high tech has got to do more to censor the net. You got to take off the election deniers. Well, who do you think is going to lose in a censorship battle? Who do you think is going to lose? I see Matt Drudge still up there, but Greg Palast could be taken down. And so I'm just telling you, if you don't see me on the net in a couple of weeks, you'll know why. But we have got to get off this kick of censorship. We've got to say no censorship. The answer to a lie, to fake news, is true news. The answer to a lie is the truth. The answer should not be let's go on a hunt to remove fake news or remove election deniers from the internet. Because what happens is that the people with the real investigative reporters get removed. I had my story for Democracy Now! From Georgia 2 years ago was removed, was forced to be taken down by YouTube because, again, I was an election denier. All I was doing was literally reporting on the fact that I got a federal judge to say that these removals from the voter rolls are illegal. I was a lawsuit brought by NAACP, Rainbow Push, my friend Jesse Jackson, and Black Voters Matter Fund. If you know Latasha Brown and Black Voters Matter Fund, very tremendous grassroots organization. And we got a federal court judgment to require the state to review with us why they got all these hundreds of thousands of people wrongly dismissed from the voter rolls. I ran that story on Democracy Now! I couldn't get it on anywhere else. And then YouTube forced us to take it down. I did it with, then I had a wider story expanding it with Consortium News, which is founded by the great late Bob Perry, the guy who broke the Iran-Contra story. They forced that off the net too. They might force this off the net as well. I noticed that someone used the phrase that election in Georgia, in Florida in 2000 was stolen. Well, if you put that out there in a transcript, I guarantee you you will not be allowed to post this on YouTube. I'm telling you right now. So they're not allowing us to tell this story. And I'm just afraid that, unfortunately, the censorship has not only been endorsed, but pushed, especially by the Democratic Party, saying we need to have high tech has to be held to a standard of truth. Well, guess what, guys? As soon as we get to that game, yeah, I'm not a big fan of having Alex Jones bilge all over the internet. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's ravings. But I'm not afraid of them either. And the minute we start censoring people, we will lose the censorship war. I want to say a couple more things, then we could take some questions. Unfortunately, the film Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman, which is very, very important, is not available now. We had it out for free before the Georgia election because we thought it was important for people in Georgia, but it hasn't been commercially released. And part of it, frankly, is at this moment why we had to take it down is that we don't have the funds for the insurance because of all of these attacks. When you write about elections, our insurance and legal bill right now is just went over $50,000 and we can't pay that bill. So we've had to take the film down. But that's why I'm going to ask you now, anyone here, we are trying to raise the funds so we can get that film out, back up and out. And so if you want, I would appreciate if you go to gregpalast.com and it says you can donate. And if you donate, that is one way to see the film Vigilante, because if you donate $50 minimum, if you donate $50, I will send you a DVD of the film because that makes you a producer of the film. And since you're on the project, you're allowed to get a copy of the film. So if you want a copy of the film and you want to make sure that it gets out there, make a donation at gregpalast.com. Because if you don't do it, I'm telling you right now, it's not like I'm going to get MSNBC to do it. You know, you saw that in that film. I'll tell you one story. You saw in that film that there was a woman who throws me out of her house. Her name's Pam Reardon. Under the new law, SB 202 passed by the Georgia legislature, signed by the Brian Kemp. Under that law, any voter, anyone can challenge an unlimited number of other people's votes. I kid you not. When I say unlimited, I mean unlimited. I'm talking these big numbers. So that one woman in red who was screaming at me, she personally challenged, are you ready for this? She personally challenged 32,000 voters' right to vote. My team called 800 of those voters. Not one was an illegal voter. Not one. But they were astonishingly, overwhelmingly young and black. In other words, voters of color, and the color is blue. So I go to her house and you saw me holding a picture of a black woman in my hand. That's one of her neighbors whose vote she challenged, saying she no longer lived where she is registered to live. But there she was. I have her at her house on camera. So she threw me out. Now I wasn't going to mess with her because when I come in, she's dressed like Nancy Reagan, looking very formal, but she had ammo boxes all over the place. And right next to the door, there was an automatic weapon, a modified, someone later told me it was a modified Kalashnikov. So I wasn't going to argue with her when she threw me out. She's screaming at me and swearing like a sailor. I had to take some of that out so I wouldn't get an R rating on the film. Another guy, his name is Alton Russell, chairman of the Georgia Republican Party in Southern Georgia, in Columbus. This guy personally challenged 4,000 voters, including, as you'll see in the film, and we had the second clip. I was going to show you another clip from the film, but it seems to be very difficult. So this one guy, this Republican Party chairman, and by the way, there were 88 challenges. Everyone was made by a Republican operative. I will say one good thing about the Democratic Party is that the Democratic Party didn't challenge a single voter. The Republican Party challenged 149,000 voters, 149,000 voters. And they are required, those voters, to get their vote back, have to go into the county offices and prove they are who they are, that they're American citizens who live where they live. Now, most of the people were challenged, by the way. So this guy who challenged 4,000 people, his specialty was challenging black soldiers from Fort Benning who were assigned somewhere else. So you'll see on camera, one of the heroes of our film is Major Gamaliel Turner. Major Gamaliel Turner is here in California. He lives in Columbus, Georgia, near Fort Benning. He is America's expert on warfare of the future. Right now, when I was at his home, he's working on improving a weapon for Ukraine. African-American career military officer, and the Republican Party challenged his vote. One of 4,000 people in Columbus County alone, challenged by this guy, the Republican Party chairman. Now, he's a vigilante vote hunter, and he actually dresses up as a vigilante. He puts on these performances where he dresses up like Doc Holliday. He's got a cowboy hat on, the cowboy boots, these old pants with the zipper open, by the way, you'll see on the film. And he likes to play Doc Holliday, the vigilante. And this guy knocked off Major Turner's vote. And so you'll see in the film, we do something that's quite extraordinary. He said he challenged the right of Major Turner vote, saying this guy doesn't live in Georgia anymore. So he showed up at this house to do his little shtick, performing as Doc Holliday. And what he didn't know is that he was at the home of Major Gamaliel Turner, the African-American whose vote he's challenged, who said he didn't live in that house. So he's in the very house that he said that the major didn't live in. You'll see that in the film. But you know, this is a very difficult story to tell, because I am saying that our elections are not fair. It's not 1952, but we are moving backwards. They can't take away all the votes all the time. I can't use the S word. They can't remove all the voters all the time. We do win them. As Warnock said, I won, but just because I won doesn't mean that there's no vote suppression. So we have a very serious problem in America, but it's two problems. One is we have a broken voting system. But the second thing is it's becoming harder and harder to report about it. When I first started reporting this story, I was complaining how difficult it was to do. I had a report about the theft of the election in Florida on BBC television out of London, the Guardian newspapers, Al Jazeera, it went all over the world, but the United States of America, all over the world, but the United States of America. And finally, I got into Salon. I got into the New York Times through Paul Krugman's column, like it was opinion that the vote was still. And then, by the way, 2 years later, the New York Times ran a story in 2004, or 4 years later, saying, talk about the, quote, infamous felon purge of 2000. How could they call it infamous when they never ran the story in the first place? Never, ever. They didn't touch the story. And now it's hard. And I thought that that was difficult, but it's nothing like it is now. Nothing like it is now, where all our stuff is getting taken off the internet. And I'm telling you, this is being pushed to a great deal by the left, which has decided that it's a good idea that we have to have controls and censorship of the internet. Well, guess what? It's an argument that the left has won, and the right wing is using it as a weapon to beat the hell out of us, to silence Greg Palast, to silence investigative reporters, and all over the country. And I'm really getting so discouraged that I'm ready to quit this business completely. I'm telling you right now. Anyway, if you want to catch the film, get a copy of the film, help get the film out, go to gregpalast.com. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you, Greg. Tremendous presentation. I have put in the chat the link to your website where people can donate and get a DVD of the Vigilante and become a co-producer with you and Martin Sheen.
Yep, we'll put you in the credits.
There you go. So we have 3 questions, and then I'll get in line. Let's start with John Crampman.
Thank you, Steve. Greg, I've been a fan of yours going back to the days of Bush-Cheney misrule, and I strongly want to commend you for your moral and sometimes even physical courage.
Yeah.
Basically, what I wanted to bring up, you spoke about democratic censorship, and
yes.
What I would like to get your thoughts on is. Just as the Republican Party specializes in suppressing the votes of African Americans, it increasingly seems to me that the Democratic Party specializes in suppressing the votes of progressives. And toward that end, I would point towards Bernie Sanders' 2 presidential runs, the recent 2022 North Carolina Senate race, where the Democratic Party worked very hard to keep a legitimately qualified Green candidate off the ballot, and even going back to the 2003 San Francisco mayor's race. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but I'm afraid to tell you my thoughts, because one of the
threats, tell me anyway. I won't tell anyone.
Well, one of the threats from Google, which will take me off, or like if you look up Greg Palast, it'll flash up, unreliable or something. They'll give you devil warnings. And one of the things that they said where I'm in trouble is because they said that I had said that 500,000 Bernie Sanders voters were blocked in the last 2 primaries in California. in the presidential primaries. And I got that information directly. I have another secret academic life. I used to teach statistics, and I have a degree in economics. I lectured at Cambridge University in England. And I got a hold of one of my fellow statisticians, the experts on voting statistics from the California poll in the US. And what you have in California is this unusual system in which, for example, if you want to vote in the Democratic primary, but you are not a registered Democrat, it's incredibly difficult, nearly impossible, because you'll get a ballot mailed to you, which won't have someone like Bernie Sanders on it. If you're now most in California, the non-party preference people, the people that pick no party, they are the second biggest party in California, almost as big as the Democrats. And most people who register no party preference, if you're in California and you do so, you're a fool, because then you lose your right to vote in a primary. I know the Democrats say you can vote in their primaries, but you have to go in and ask for a special ballot. So you will get a ballot mailed to you, which won't have the primary names from the Democratic Party unless you're a registered Democrat. So you have to mail back your ballot. In California, we're a mail-in state. You have to mail back your ballot, find the part in the form that says, I want the no party preference crossover ballot. It has to be called a crossover ballot. Listen to this crazy business you have to go through. You have to ask for a crossover ballot, then it comes back to you as a crossover. You get a special crossover ballot. Then you got to mail that ballot back in, or you go into the voting station. You have to not only turn in your no party preference ballot for the crossover ballot, but you have to have the envelope. I had a woman in front of me who lost her vote here in Hollywood because she went to vote in the primary. She's independent. And she said, here's my ballot, the no party preference ballot. I want the Democratic Party crossover ballot. She knew she had asked for a crossover ballot. They said, well, you didn't bring in the envelope. And I said, she can't vote an envelope. This is her ballot. They blocked it. But according to the California poll, 500,000 independent voters, there are like 4 million independent voters. I have to double check that number in California. About 500,000 who wanted to vote in the primary and who wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders, because the independent voters were 2-1 for Sanders. They lost their vote. Now, I reported that. This is pure statistics from the experts. But because I reported that, they said, well, the site 538 said that the California primary elections were perfectly legitimate. So how come you're spreading this false news? I'm spreading statistics. I'm spreading facts. But they don't want me to spread that fact. And again, certainly the Democratic Party doesn't want to be called out for its shenanigans. I was viciously attacked in the New York Times for this. And this is the problem. Most of my fellow reporters became reporters because they flunked math. They're afraid of statistics, and God forbid they go from anything but, you know, the crap of the so-called record turnout in Georgia. Do you realize not one damn reporter in America decided to go actually look at the numbers, even though they took that record turnout lie? It's an absolute total fabrication lie. It's on endless press releases from the Secretary of State's office, but every one of those press releases has a link at the bottom, which takes you to the actual numbers. And the actual numbers are completely opposite of the press release. We didn't have one goddamn reporter just click on that button to find out how many votes there were. It's that simple. It can't be a record turnout if you go from 4.5 million votes to 3.5 million votes. And I'm sorry, we had hundreds of thousands of Bernie Sanders voters who weren't allowed to cast a ballot. And that's what happened in California. That's how they've got it set up. California polls expert calls this purge by postcard.
Right.
And that's one of the problems, is that the Democratic Party has their hands dirty in this too. So you're never allowed to call an election into question, because then you're an election denier. You are providing false, it's false information. And of course, between here, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and Kevin McCarthy and Pelosi all hold hands in favor of censoring the net and censoring Greg Palast.
Greg, We've got 5 questions
Okay, I'll make them
and
quick.
about 15 or 18 minutes. So short questions, short answers. Carol Francis.
Yes, Greg, thank you. I love the video. I think everybody should go to your site and see it. The left is not the Democratic Party. Is it possible for us to do a letter writing campaign to the New York Times? I mean, what would it take? I mean, if we could, how would that work? Like when they put out an article like that, or you write it, you know, that hundreds of people from the movement across the country wrote letters to him.
Well, skip the New York Times because they don't care. But I do think that we have to be concerned that about this censorship. Where we go next, I think we have to go to, well, like we have my so-called Congressman Adam Schiff, who spent so much time on the Russian front, he's forgot to be a congressman. And I would like to see letters to Adam Schiff. How come we have this censorship, especially of election coverage?
Why Schiff?
Adam Schiff, who's our congressman.
Why Schiff?
Yeah.
Adam Schiff.
Adam
But
Schiff is our congressman.
why him?
Well, I don't know where else you would go, but the main thing is, you know what would be really helpful? We're never going to get Google and Chrome and Facebook, et cetera, to stand up, and Twitter, because you can see Elon Musk is given in too. I mean, he's a dangerous nut, but he's at least for freedom of the press. But believe me, Twitter's shutting down too. I think what we have to do is go to my website and just get the word out that there's an alternative and get it. That's why we have these alternative outlets, whether it's Democracy Now! or Flashpoints, which you'll hear on KPFK, which I do an election crimes bulletin. Go to my site, get it out. We have to use our own methods on every posting we have, every listing we have, to get out the word and get out the truth. That's the only way we can do it. That's how I got into America, is that I was the first journalist to have a website. And I went around at the time, the internet was an open place where I could go around the mainstream gatekeepers. The only reason we know about the Florida felon purge is because BBC and The Guardian just started launching their US websites. So we just got to go around these guys, take my stuff and spread it around.
Let's go to Rose for the next question.
Okay, this is very quick. It's just gone away again. Okay, I was looking at my daily feed on The Guardian, and the main headline is right-wing group pours millions in dark money into US voter suppression bid. Tax filings reveal the advocacy team of the Heritage Foundation spent millions on lobbying to block the voters' rights in battleground states. That's today's Guardian. It's just coincidence.
Well, yes. I mean, that's The Guardian. That's where they come from. That's not, when I was attacked by this Google troll, my investigation of the vote in California was done for The Guardian, but you won't find it in a single US newspaper.
So let's, folks, when you've asked your question, take your hand down. I do see hands that are being raised on screen, Ruby. I'll come to you in a moment, Ruby. Let me go to Michael Novak, whose KPFK station was just mentioned.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Greg. Yeah, I wanted to thank you so much for all you do for KPFK and Pacific in general. And I just want to mention that if people go to the KPFK website, they can click on the archives. And if they put in Poets Cafe in the dropdown, they'll hear another side of Greg Palast. He was on Wednesday with Matt Cedillo as a poet, not a journalist. So just want to share that with people. It's on the archive from the 11th. So thank you so much for everything, really, Matt. It's, Greg. It's
thank you. Yes, if you go to gregpalast.com, we'll be linking back to that. My other side as a poet. I don't know if it's another side. It's a kind of reporting the news too. Just it rhymes.
Michael, did you have a question in addition?
No. So that's at KPFK at the archives, kpfk.org.
Good.
And I provide an election crimes bulletin once a week on Flashpoints, which you can also hear on Mondays and Fridays on KPFK.
And breaking news, John Crampner just made a $50 donation.
Thank you.
And is now a co-producer of Vigilante.
And I'll send you a DVD and I'll sign it too.
I just donated 52, but I think I did it in the wrong place. So if it comes across, send me the DVD, because I have seen it, but I never got the DVD.
No.
This is good. All right, we have Fernando with a short question.
Yes, George, I really agree with you, because this is really a systemic problem that we're experiencing here in the U.S. Voting suppression is one of the issues that we need to provide. And Guantanamo itself is also a victim of this larger system that we're in, and so we really have to create because we can no longer trust the Republican or Democrats, because they both mingling around with the system itself. And so how do you solve many of this problem? And so I think the only way to solve this is that to create our own, meaning that as long this interest group is in, they do their way, they do whatever they can to suppress from voting right. You have 3.5 million in prison, and these are similar thing. We have to abolish like what you call this, the Patriotic Act, because as long you have many of these laws that's in it, you cannot really do much, and so the only way is to create our own as a bigger, effective voice of in America. And I really agree with you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
I'm going to call on myself in line. In the chat, you may not have seen it. I asked, Greg,
Yes.
Have individual lawsuits or class action lawsuits been filed on behalf of any voter whose votes were suppressed? And if so, what have been the results?
Very quickly, there have been many lawsuits. In fact, I won one myself because I sued Brian Kemp and his successor to open up their files on vote suppression, and the federal judge ordered them to open their files and pay our attorneys. So I got one suit in that one, but it's an endless litigation war. For example, I just said that this soldier, this African-American career officer's vote was challenged. He is now suing the challenger, saying, you've defamed me. You said I was a criminal voter. I was an illegal voter trying to vote in Georgia, whereas I am a soldier assigned by the President of the United States to California. That's why I need my absentee ballot. So there's a lawsuit on that. There's a lawsuit over almost every provision of SB 202. And I'm happy to say that it took them a while, but the Justice Department is finally suing True the Vote, which is a cat's paw of the billionaire Bradley family of Wisconsin. And they are the ones that have come up with these ugly hit lists. They're also the ones that created that wacky film 2000 Mules. So justice is getting on that. But for the most part, lawsuits have been brought by Fair Fight. They've been brought by the NAACP in Georgia. Obviously, there's suits elsewhere. We were also joined in when I talked about these illegal purges in a lawsuit by Black Voters Matter Fund, where I work with Black Voters Matter, and also Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, which is the big Hispanic organization. So there are lots of suits. We usually lose. One of the problems is that before an election, they say, oh, it's too close, no one's been harmed. After the election, they say, oh, it's too late, there's nothing we can do about the election results. So it's very hard to win these cases. I can't say we always lose. I had a film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which again, now Best Democracy Money Can Buy, you can get for free at gregpalast.com. You can download that for free, Greg, at Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And it's an attack on a system called Crosscheck. And we got that defeated partly through lawsuits by the ACLU after they saw my film. So a lot of it is public pressure, and then the lawsuit tends to be the last thing that kills it off. So it's whack-a-mole. We stop one game here and they come up with another. We stop Crosscheck and they come up with vigilante voter challenges. So no matter what we do, they've come up with a counter move. No matter how many voter registration trickery we kill in a court, they've got another one coming up. So lawsuits are there. There's plenty of them. But that's not the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is to get the word out, get the truth out. And by the way, the good news is they can't take away all the votes all the time. They can't purge all the voters. So I don't want to discourage people from voting, because we did see that young and African-American voters and the new rising Hispanic and Asian American vote in Georgia is what put Raphael Warnock over the top. And again, it's not whether I'm for or against Warnock. I'm nonpartisan. It's just the question of let the people make that decision. So to a great extent, it's not the lawsuits that are going to win. It's doing whatever you have to do to get to vote to win.
Thank you. Ruby, you had your hand up. Yeah. Ruby.
This is so important, Greg. It is so important.
Thank you, Doctor.
For this next generation, people who think that their vote doesn't count, and all of the different nationalities and languages coming together. This is our country. So what are the three things that you think that each one of us could do?
Okay. First of all,
three positive things.
Okay, three things. First, number one, protect your own vote. I tell everyone, there's massive purges in America, voter rolls. Don't show up and find out that you've been removed from the voter rolls. In every state, you can check your voter registration online 60 days before an election. Do so and get everyone you know to do so. Second, join a voting rights organization like Black Voters Matter, I think is one of the better ones. The Transformative Justice Coalition is another one with Barbara Arnwine and Rainbow Push. We've had some great organizations and in every state. The third is to get out the word. And in my case, I say, go to gregpalast.com and start spreading out my articles, spread out the articles about Georgia and the fall in the vote, not the record vote, the vigilante stories. I have a lot of, even if you can't at this moment, we'll get Vigilante, the film, out there again. But if we can't get the film Vigilante out or at this moment, there's still plenty of short articles and short films that you really ought to be getting out from my site and from other great sites where they are investigating voter suppression. And so it's getting the word out. When the reason I'm a journalist now, I switched to journalism. I was an investigator before, and I found out that the truth doesn't matter unless you get it out. So that's why I became a journalist. I have to believe that knowledge makes a difference. And I think that when people find out what's going on, what Stacey Abrams proved, the Democratic Party kept saying, don't talk about vote suppression. It'll just discourage people from voting. No, what Stacey Abrams proved is that when you talk about someone stealing your vote or trying to steal your vote, you realize how valuable it is and you fight for it. So the more she talked about vote suppression, the higher the turnout. That's key to the turnout, is telling people they're trying to steal your vote because it's valuable. Don't steal your own vote by not voting or not taking care of your vote, not taking the steps you need to protect your vote. So get the word out, get the word out, get the word out. gregpalast.com, get it out there. And there's other great groups, but I have to believe that information is the power we have. Money is the power they have. Information is the power we have. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you, Greg. In the chat, I think 3 or 4 people while you were speaking have become co-producers, donated $50. I know that others will do it after this program. we are so grateful for the work you do every day. A couple times you hinted at burnout and stress and depression, and we know that in this movement. Please, Greg, do not give up. Do not close shop. We will promote this video. We will promote the links to Vigilante. Martin Sheen is a good friend of ICUJP and the other organizations that make up this coalition. So we're thrilled that he supports your film. We hope you're able to cover the insurance and get that film out.
Yes.
You've whet our appetite with the trailer. It's obviously a historically important film. I'm so glad you put your finger on this effort in Congress and in Republican state legislatures to suppress history as much as they are suppressing the vote. They cannot last if the true history of America is exposed, and that history goes on to this very moment.
That's right.
So thank you, Greg. You're a great ally in this work. Stay with us if you can for our closing.
Well, I'm going to have to. I have to be on Al Jazeera in a couple minutes. I have to prepare
that's
for
fair.
that.
That's fair.
And yeah, I wish I could say I was going on an American network, but you know how it works. We'll get there yet. So that's why I appreciate you giving me this platform. You do great work. I really, really appreciate the fact that people have taken out the time and energy to learn something today about the other side of America.
Thank you. Be well, be safe. We'll be in touch.